Our next speaker for this edition of the Joy Change Speakers Series is Professor Amin Al-Hassan, PhD. He is the Director General of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. He is a development communication expert and a faculty member of the University of Development Studies, where he served as Dean of Faculty and later campus principal. He has previously worked with GBC Radio News and the Ghana News Agency. Professor Al-Hassan has a master's and a doctoral degrees in communication studies from Tampere University and in Finland and Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. He has lectured at International School of Social Science in Finland, McGill University in Montreal, and York University in Toronto. Professor Al-Hassan resigned his position at York University in 2012 to take up lectureship position at the University of Development Studies, Nyankpala campus. As a development communication expert, Professor Al-Hassan has authored and edited 3 books and several peer-reviewed book chapters and journal articles in journalism, mass communication, and development studies. His book, Communication Policy and Economic Fundamentalism in Ghana, which was released in 2004, traces the history and development of colonial and post-colonial governments' response to the use of media for development. Professor Al-Hassan, it is your turn to do your presentation.
Prof, please unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much. And it is a real pleasure to be invited to this platform. And I want to start by first commending the Department of Communication Studies, especially Dr. Abenayenim Yabu-Abanini, for leading this process of bringing this conversation up for into national attention. I think that it's been overdue, and it is a delight that we are finally getting the opportunity to put on the national space discussions about the media 30 years after we have experimented with media freedoms and democracy in this country. But before I go into the conversation, I want to refer to some of the conversations that have gone already, especially between the GIBA president. During his presentation, I heard him talk about TV licensing, of getting licensing from NCA. I want to clarify that nobody in this country, Ghana, is allowed to license anybody to do TV. The Constitution frowns on that, and it forbids it. So what NCA does is simply authorization. And as I will be showing going on in this conversation, there's a need for us to really look the basis under which authorization was permitted under the Constitution. I think that the state of the Ghanaian media report is timely and excellent, and it serves as an opportunity to appreciate our national media policy and practice so far. In fact, it provides an avenue that can give us alerts as to whether we are getting it right as a country and whether we are getting it wrong. And for that matter, it gives us this opportunity to examine what we have been doing so far. And I want to start by first looking at the existing media regulatory architecture. If you look at Chapter 12 of the 1992 Constitution, and a few pieces of legislation that have survived the 1992 Constitution, I mean legislation that have not been made redundant or abolished by the 1992 Constitution, we see that the main orientation of the architecture we have had to do with insulating the state media from government control. So the NMC was created and put in place to oversee this. We can say that we have been largely successful in this area of policy practice. An additional responsibility we remember very well was added to the NMC to monitor the media space and call errant practitioners to order. In this area, we see that the Media Commission's mandate was weak. It was never given any power to act in this domain. It has a power when it comes to insulating the state-owned media from governmental control. It has the power to appoint the board of media, state-owned media. It has the power to appoint the CEOs of state-owned media. And that makes the state-owned media governance structure accountable to the NMC and not to the executive arm of government. In this area, we have been very successful. But when it comes to monitoring the airspace and calling airing media houses to book, we, private sector, we see that it has largely not been effective. Simply because the architecture that was put in place 30 years ago has not armed the NMC with the necessary power to act. Now, what really informed the media regulatory architecture we have had today, it was, if you look back, 30 years back, it was precisely the experience of the use of state power to control the media over a very coward civil society. The experience of private media excesses or misconduct was not part of the historical experience of the framers of the Constitution. So we failed to foresee a new media ecosystem that we have today. The focus was on freedom to publish. That is why the law did not place any inhibition on newspaper publication, apart from the registry with the NMC. And indeed, we must celebrate this structure as one of the best in Africa. I think that Ghana's media regulatory architecture is the best in Africa. But when it comes to the electronic media, the constitutional provisions foresaw a situation where we had limited resources, so that it provided for a regulatory system which gave authorization, not licensing. Why authorization? Simply because they were limited in, the spectrum, the frequencies for broadcasting has to be managed in order to ensure sanity on the airwaves. The big question we must ask ourselves is, what if the electronic space is literally unlimited? Will the regulatory powers of the NCA be justified? Assuming that we look back and we see that the framers of the Constitution knew that there will come a time when the electronic space to publish is like the marketplace of the newspaper. Will the CVET that warranted the empowerment of the regulator to authorize before you publish in the electronic space be instituted? With the newspaper, the expectation was that the market will determine who can continue to operate a newspaper. No licensing was required, it was abolished. That rule also applied to the electronic media, no licensing, only authorization, because of the fact that there's a limited space. In practice, when we reflect on all of this, we see that it was a reflection of the technology at that time, an analog broadcasting space. Now we are ushered into a new world of digital space. Convergence has changed the industry. Electronic space is like unlimited. The electronic space to broadcast, when it comes to radio, is digital audio broadcasting, DAB, and other forms of technology. It gives us more spaces than we have today. Then we come to TV. We have options. You either have digital terrestrial television or direct-to-home television. You have smart TV, you have web TV. In all of these, there are almost unlimited opportunities. And this space, if we knew this 30 years ago, we will not be empowering somebody to husband the electronic space. And this is my understanding of the situation. Now, I want to relate this to the discussion that we heard from Giba earlier. My position is this, and my understanding of the broadcast media scene is this. And Samson made reference to the fact that we have too many TV stations, too many radio stations. It is so because there is an existing subsidy of the private media, very huge subsidy. It happened because there was policy indecision on this particular space. So the national DTT is funded by the taxpayer. And all those who are on it are on it literally for free for the past 5-6 years. They don't pay anything. You don't find that anywhere. Now, I would say that the reaction of the Ministry of Communication to impose some payment on the DTT itself, well, it needs more consultation and some agreement on how much to pay. But the reason why we have oversupply of media in this country, because the private sector is largely highly subsidized by the taxpayer. Because DTT should not be something that you sit on it for free. It also means that if you are going to institute levies, it has to be reasonable levies that those who are on it can pay. Now, when you look at how the Constitution talked of the newspaper industry, it saw it as, hey, you are free to publish. The market will determine who will survive in the newspaper industry. You can start your newspaper, your chances that can you survive the market? This same rule should also apply to the television sector, the radio sector, so that the market will help to cut out. But as we see today, when the NDC is in power, there are people coming for channels on the DTT because it's literally free. And when the MPP also comes in power, they will get their members come for channels on the. So in the end, there's crowding on the national DTT. We can stop that crowding if we properly implement the policy, which says that the DTT system, which is a national broadcast infrastructure, should be run by an administrative body. And that body should be able to recover costs and run it without necessarily expecting the taxpayer to literally fund the DTT. And when we do that, I believe that, like the newspaper industry, those who will survive. Now, this point of argument is not against the recommendations that Dr. Enimwa Yeboah-Banin proposed about capping the numbers and also capping who can own how many channels. I think that these things can all come together because we are not alone. Other countries have done it. And that is why we have more TV stations in Ghana than in Nigeria. Because in Nigeria, you are not going to have a free DTT set up and go and sit on it just because you have a political party affiliation. So that brings in, but that is an aside. But the main point I am trying to put up is that technological convergence has rendered the current regulatory architecture inadequate. And we have to ask whether, if the framers of this constitution or the constitutional provisions and the subsequent legislation, e.g. the establishment of the NMC, the way it is, the setting up of the NCA, the way it is, and the subsequent case laws, that emerges from the Supreme Court interpretations of issues about media. When we put all these together, we have to ask ourselves whether they are fit for purpose. Or if I may rephrase the question, will the structures that we have were put in place, that we have in place today, will be there if we knew 30 years ago that 30 years on, we will have the current technological space? And I want to just use one case to illustrate what I'm driving at. We are all aware. If you are not aware, please take your remote control and scan your TV channels. you come across what we call police TV. Police TV. Now, let's step back and go back to the Constitution and go back to the laws and go back to the reasoning behind certain Supreme Court decisions and extract what is a state broadcaster. It is simply an institution that was founded with state resources and is funded with state resources. That is how you can understand. And when you say this today, every Ghanaian calls, oh, that is GBC, Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. But if the Ghana Police Service, for example, which depends on 100% state funds to operate, uses part of the allocated state resources to start a television station, and it starts to typically act as if it is in the business of broadcast journalism. I've seen some content on their channel where a policeman in dress with police uniform with a camera and a mic doing vox pop in communities on the channel, literally mean what we would define as broadcast journalists. Should we then call the police TV station a state broadcaster? If so, why is it not under the direct supervision of the National Media Commission? How could it be licensed or rather better still, authorized to broadcast without recourse to the National Media Commission? Now, I'm raising this as an example to show how, and I know a lot of state institutions are applying to the NCA for authorization to broadcast. Then it opens up for discussion. Will the conditions placed on the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, because it is a state broadcaster, will these conditions be also placed on these state entities that are broadcasting? It brings for the inadequacies of our systems. Why is the NMC not instrumental in the authorization that is granted to organizations to broadcast? Now, I will want to bring this example and our experience so far in Ghana into theory. I mean, when you want to theorize this development, let us remember that the theoretical basis of media in a democracy is that it is supposed to mediate. It is the medium through which three critical units of national community, the state, which includes the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, while the ordinary person will call government, as one block. The second block is the market, the realm of free enterprise, and the third block is civil society. These three blocks are mediated by the media. And so all the privileges of the media through legislation, through the constitution, and the privileges are founded on the fact that the media has this role to play within this system. It's supposed to mediate. And it is a theoretical justification for media in a democracy. What these three blocks of, and when they were developing our constitution, all they cared about was how do you prevent the state from abuse so that civil society and the market will not suffer. The three blocks I'm talking about. Today, we know NMC is doing its work very well in terms of insulating the state media from governmental control. But if you have the police, theoretically speaking, defined as the coercive arm of government, uses state resources to engage in TV broadcasts. Was this development foreseen by the framers of our constitution? If they knew this, you can imagine what rules they would have put in place to ensure that this never happened. So what I'm pointing out is the fact that so far, our experience so far, 30 years on, suggests that the conditions, the practices so far tells us that the rules of the game needs to be redefined. We need to rethink the regulatory architecture we have in force. From a theory of public sphere, if you want to also ground this conversation into theory, you will begin to see that there is a certain framework. The theory of public sphere is used to make sense of the media's functioning in a democracy, the framework to make sense of it. It is expected that there will always be media excesses. It is the state-owned, whether it is state-owned or private, there's always going to be media excesses. And that is why avenues for seeking redress are always provided. We provided for this when it comes to state media. We did not provide for this when it comes to the private media. We are expecting the law courts to resolve differences. But listen, the problem is this. This particular Ghanaian case is a unique one. Throughout the world, it is not so. Let's take the United Kingdom, for example. In the UK, they don't allow the courts to be the first point of call when you have media excesses. There is a special arrangement for you to complain about excesses with the BBC. And there's another special arrangement for you to seek redress when the private media offends you. So we have in Britain today, which is contained in the Broadcasting Act 1990, the Independent Television Commission and the Radio Authority. These two bodies have powers that even allows them to withdraw the licensing to broadcast. If they make an adjudication and you do not obey, they can withdraw your power to broadcast. Now, you don't want to tell me that the UK's democracy is better than Ghana's democracy. No, but they are able to accept this. Now, because of our history, because of how we arrived...
Prof, we need you to finish up.
Yes, yeah. So what I want to draw our attention to is that we need to brave up and realize that media regulation is not an anathema to a democratic system. We have to be ready to put in place structures that will control, and that will control whether a political party agent can also own a TV station. Whether when a private media abuses its privileges as a media, the individual has to go to court or he has to go to a commission, like a reviewed and empowered NMC, so that quick decisions can be taken and they can get the redress that they deserve. All right. This, I think, will help set up a better framework for our democracy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. But there's one issue that is recurring, and you appear to concentrate on regulation. I've read your article in the Media and Communications Review, and you are looking into the future and suggesting that networks, the telcos, may take over the space of broadcasting and then monetize what should be free to viewers, among other things. For example, you say that the very network advantage that enabled telcos to venture into banking also positions them to go into content distribution and contest in the traditional space of media organizations if net neutrality rules are not put in place. You say that when telcos become new, powerful content distributors than traditional media, they will have the liberty of deploying algorithms as the new news gatekeepers and not journalists. That's a danger. To determine which story can trend faster on their own network. My question, do you think that we have a regulator or a system that is able to do what you foresee will bring us trouble if regulations are not made? We have already heard about the complaints, and we are comparing Ghana to Nigeria. Nigeria, over 170 million population, has only 361 FM stations, and even out of that, 59 are supposed to be federal or state broadcasters, and 34 are university and polytechnic stations. We go to South Africa, they have a total of 59 FM stations. Kenya has 118 FM stations. And here in Ghana, we have issued over 700 licenses, and more than 500 are operating. How can you expect that there will be regulation that is effective? Prof, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, I think I missed the last part because there was a network problem.
How do you expect there to be effective regulation in a system that doesn't seem to, hold people to check?
Okay. I think basically we have to agree that when we found a digital dividend that comes to broadcasting, we have never developed any policy or legislation. In fact, the broadcasting bill comes close to doing this. We have never experienced anything like that. We have simply allowed things to go, and that was what I refer to as policy indecision over the years. And so the conversion that have happened means that broadcasting, in fact, the future of broadcasting is online. The BBC Director General, my counterpart at BBC, recently came out to say that they are targeting to see a future BBC that is 100% online. What it means for us is that increasingly telcos have the power to shut down your network. As I speak today, GBC channels can go off air. And sometimes I rush and ask why, and they'll say that it is the telcos, it's the network that has gone off. And so the power to shut off a system rests with the telco, and that needs a regulatory supervision. So for example, it is perfectly possible that a telco can choose to disrupt our transmission and say that, oh, it was a technical problem, just at the critical moment that we are doing some particular broadcast. There is no legislative cover on this type of relationships.
Interesting.
Number two, telcos themselves have moved into content distribution. Apps are now capable of giving you TV transmission. And some of them have launched it. Now, the difference between Ghana and, let's say, European countries is that they have what we call net neutrality laws. Net neutrality is simply saying that if your business is to run the network, you are forbidden from doing certain things unless there are transparent processes such that you cannot take undue advantage. So to make it simpler, let's look at the ECG Gridco relationship. Gridco is a network operator. ECG, that's electricity. ECG is a retailer of electricity. Gridco controls the entire network of the country. So they cannot go into distribution for services for retail. In broadcasting, when you control the network, you should be forbidden from going into content distribution because you have the ability to also develop your content distribution.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. Yes, Doc, what do you have to say?
I am just wondering, on the back of what Prof said, how BBC is going in the future, digital. I'm wondering how the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation is also taking advantage of what the digital offers us. And I know that these days I see some live streaming go on social media and all of that, but as a systemic, and a systematic step to taking advantage of the digital, I'm interested in what Prof would say on that.
Okay, so